Have you ever laid awake at 3 a.m. replaying a conversation from 6 months ago, analysing every word, every pause, every facial expression, wondering if you said something wrong, or maybe you've spent an entire weekend spiralling through every possible outcome of a decision you haven't even made yet, creating elaborate mental scenarios that probably will never happen? If this sounds familiar, welcome to the club. You're an overthinker, and you're definitely not alone. But here's what's fascinating about overthinking. It's not actually a weakness or a character flaw like most people think. It's a complex psychological phenomenon that reveals something profound about how your mind works. And the crazy part? The same mental processes that keep you up at night worrying about imaginary problems are the exact same ones that fuel creativity, problem solving, and innovation. My name is Alex, and I've spent the last 5 years diving deep into the psychology of overthinking, not just through research, but through my own personal battle with an overactive mind. I used to think there was something fundamentally wrong with me because I couldn't just let things go like everyone else seemed to. Turns out I was completely wrong about what overthinking actually is and why it happens. In this video, I'm going to reveal the hidden psychology behind overthinking that most people never talk about. We'll explore why your brain gets stuck in these loops, what's really happening in your mind when you can't stop analysing, and most importantly, how understanding this psychology can actually transform overthinking from your biggest weakness into your greatest strength. But first, let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah is a marketing executive who, by all external measures, is incredibly successful. She's got the corner office, the impressive salary, the respect of her colleagues, but every night she lies in bed replaying her presentations, dissecting every question she answered, every decision she made, every email she sent. She's convinced that everyone thinks she's incompetent, that she's about to be fired, that she's somehow fooling everyone around her. Sound familiar? Sarah's story illustrates something crucial about overthinking that most people miss. It's not random. It's not just anxiety or worry. It's your brain's attempt to solve a problem that doesn't actually exist in the present moment. And this is where it gets really interesting from a psychological perspective. You see, overthinkers have what researchers call a hyperactive default mode network. This is the part of your brain that's active when you're not focused on the outside world, when you're daydreaming, remembering, or planning. For most people, this network operates at a normal level, but for overthinkers, it's like having a car engine that's constantly revving in neutral. Your brain is always working, always processing, always trying to make sense of information that might not even be relevant. But here's the plot twist that changes everything. This isn't a bug in your mental software, it's a feature. Overthinkers don't have broken brains. They have brains that are wired for deeper analysis, pattern recognition, and creative problem solving. The same mental processes that make you replay conversations are the ones that help you notice details others miss, anticipate problems before they happen, and come up with innovative solutions. The problem isn't that you overthink. The problem is that you're overthinking the wrong things at the wrong times. And once you understand the psychology behind why this happens, you can start to redirect that mental energy in ways that actually serve you. Let me paint you a picture of what's really happening in your mind when you're caught in an overthinking spiral. Imagine your brain as a sophisticated security system that's designed to keep you safe. This system has one primary job: scan for threats and prepare responses. Now, for our ancestors, threats were pretty straightforward. Predators, food shortages, hostile tribes. Your brain could identify the threat, respond appropriately, and then relax once the danger passed. But in our modern world, threats are more subtle and complex. They're not about physical survival anymore. They're about social rejection, professional failure, relationship conflicts, future uncertainties. Your brain's security system is still running the same ancient software, but now it's trying to protect you from threats that are often imaginary, distant, or completely outside your control. This is where overthinking begins. Your brain detects a potential threat. Maybe your boss seemed a little cold in that meeting, or your friend didn't respond to your text right away, and it immediately starts running threat assessment protocols. It begins generating scenarios, analyzing possibilities, searching for patterns that might predict danger. And because these modern threats are ambiguous and ongoing, your brain never gets the clear, all-clear signal that would allow it to stand down. So you end up in this mental loop where your brain keeps churning through the same information over and over, trying to find a solution to a problem that may not even exist. It's like having a computer that's stuck running the same program indefinitely, consuming processing power without producing any useful output. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about this process. The same cognitive mechanisms that create overthinking are responsible for some of humanity's greatest achievements. The ability to mentally simulate future scenarios, to analyze complex patterns, to consider multiple perspectives simultaneously. These are the hallmarks of advanced intelligence and creativity. Think about it. Every great inventor, artist, scientist, or leader has had to engage in deep, prolonged thinking about problems that didn't have obvious solutions. They had to consider multiple possibilities, imagine different outcomes, and persist through uncertainty. The difference between productive deep thinking and destructive overthinking isn't the thinking itself. It's the focus, the purpose, and the ability to reach resolution. This brings us to one of the most important distinctions in understanding overthinking psychology: the difference between reflective thinking and rumination. Reflective thinking is purposeful, goal-oriented, and leads to insight or action. Rumination is repetitive, circular, and focuses on problems without moving towards solutions. When you're engaged in reflective thinking, you might spend time analysing a challenging situation, but you're doing it with a clear purpose. You're gathering information, considering options, and working toward a decision or understanding. There's a sense of progress, even if it's gradual. Rumination, on the other hand, is like being stuck in a mental hamster wheel. You're expending enormous amounts of mental energy, but you're not actually getting anywhere. You're replaying the same scenarios, asking the same questions, and arriving at the same inconclusive answers. The thinking becomes the problem rather than the solution. The key insight here is that overthinkers aren't broken. They're just using their powerful analytical abilities in ways that aren't serving them. It's like having a Ferrari but only using it to drive in circles in your driveway. You've got incredible mental horsepower, but you need to learn how to steer it in productive directions. This is where the psychology gets really fascinating. Research shows that people who tend to overthink often have what's called high cognitive empathy. This means they're exceptionally good at understanding other people's thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. They can imagine how others might react to their words or actions, which is actually a sophisticated social skill. But this same ability can become a source of suffering when it's applied excessively to social situations. You might find yourself analysing every interaction, wondering what the other person was really thinking, imagining how they might have interpreted your behaviour. What starts as emotional intelligence becomes emotional overwhelm. Similarly, overthinkers often have what psychologists call high need for cognitive closure. This means they're uncomfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. They want clear answers, definitive solutions, and complete understanding. This drive for closure can be incredibly valuable in academic, professional, or creative contexts, where thoroughness and attention to detail are important. But when applied to life's inherently ambiguous situations, relationships, career decisions, personal identity, this need for closure can become a trap. You keep thinking because you're searching for the definitive answer that will make everything clear and certain. But many of life's most important questions don't have clear answers, and your brain's refusal to accept this uncertainty keeps you stuck in analysis paralysis. Understanding this psychology changes everything about how you approach your own thinking patterns. Instead of viewing overthinking as a personal failing, you can start to see it as a sign that your brain is trying to solve important problems. It's just using the wrong tools for the job. The solution isn't to stop thinking deeply. The solution is to learn how to channel that thinking in more productive directions. It's about understanding when your mental processes are serving you and when they're working against you. It's about developing what I call thinking awareness, the ability to observe your own thought patterns and make conscious choices about where to direct your mental energy. This awareness is the foundation of everything we're going to explore in this series, because once you understand the psychology behind overthinking, you can start to work with your brain instead of against it. You can learn to harness that analytical power for creativity, problem solving, and personal growth instead of letting it drain your energy through endless rumination. But before we dive into the practical strategies for managing overthinking, we need to explore something even deeper: the emotional landscape that fuels these thought patterns. Because overthinking isn't just about cognition, it's about the complex interplay between your thoughts, emotions, and deepest psychological needs. In the next part of this series, we're going to examine the emotional roots of overthinking. We'll explore why certain situations trigger your analytical mind more than others, how your past experiences shape your current thinking patterns, and why understanding your emotional triggers is crucial for breaking free from overthinking cycles. We'll also dive into the neuroscience of overthinking, looking at what's actually happening in your brain when you get stuck in these mental loops. You'll discover why some people are more prone to overthinking than others, and how understanding your brain's wiring can help you work with your natural tendencies instead of fighting against them. But here's what I want you to remember as we continue this journey together. Your tendency to overthink isn't a curse. It's a gift that you haven't learned to unwrap properly yet. Those late-night mental marathons, those detailed analyses of every social interaction, that inability to just let things go. These are all signs of a mind that's capable of extraordinary depth, creativity, and insight. The goal isn't to become someone who never thinks deeply about anything. The goal is to become someone who can choose when and how to engage that incredible mental machinery. Someone who can dive deep when it serves them and surface when it doesn't. Someone who can transform the psychology of overthinking from a source of suffering into a source of strength. And that transformation starts with understanding one of the most overlooked aspects of overthinking psychology: the emotional ecosystem that keeps your mind trapped in these endless loops. Because here's what nobody talks about. Overthinking isn't really about thinking at all. It's about feeling. Let me introduce you to Marcus, a software developer who can solve complex coding problems in minutes, but spent 3 weeks analysing whether his co-worker's brief thanks in an email was passive-aggressive. Marcus isn't overthinking because he loves mental puzzles. He's overthinking because that simple word triggered a cascade of emotions he doesn't even realise he's experiencing: fear, shame, inadequacy, the need for control. These are the real drivers behind overthinking, and they operate completely below the surface of your conscious awareness. Your brain isn't randomly generating anxious thoughts. It's trying to protect you from emotional pain by solving problems that feel emotionally significant. This is where the psychology gets absolutely fascinating. Every overthinking spiral is anchored to what psychologists call an emotional core belief, a deep-seated assumption about yourself, others, or the world that feels fundamentally true to you. These beliefs were formed early in your life, often through experiences that taught you specific lessons about safety, acceptance, and worth. Maybe you learned that making mistakes leads to rejection, so now your brain obsessively replays conversations looking for errors you might have made. Or perhaps you discovered that being unprepared leads to humiliation, so you mentally rehearse every possible scenario before any important event. Your overthinking patterns aren't random. They're your brain's attempt to prevent emotional pain by staying one step ahead of potential threats. But here's the crucial insight. These core beliefs operate like invisible puppet strings, pulling your thoughts in directions that feel logical but are actually being driven by emotional programming you're not even aware of. You think you're being rational and thorough, but you're actually being controlled by feelings you haven't learned to recognize or process. This is why traditional advice about overthinking, just stop worrying, live in the moment, think positive thoughts, feels so impossible to follow. It's like telling someone to stop being hungry without addressing the fact that they haven't eaten in days. The thoughts are just symptoms. The real problem is the emotional hunger that's feeding them. Consider Sarah from earlier, the marketing executive who replays her presentations every night. On the surface, she's analyzing her professional performance. But at the emotional level, she's trying to prevent the devastating feeling of being seen as incompetent. That fear of professional inadequacy isn't about her job. It's about her deep-seated belief that her worth depends on being perfect. Her brain has learned that thorough analysis feels safer than uncertainty. So it keeps her up at night, replaying every interaction, searching for evidence that she's either succeeded or failed. The thinking feels productive because it's addressing what feels like a survival-level threat, the possibility of being rejected or devalued. This emotional undercurrent explains why overthinking is so exhausting. You're not just thinking, you're feeling intensely while you think. Every scenario your brain generates carries emotional weight. Every possibility you consider triggers a physiological response. Your body is essentially experiencing dozens of potential futures, as if they're happening right now. Neuroscientists have discovered that when you imagine a future scenario, your brain activates many of the same neural pathways as if you were actually experiencing that situation. This means that when you spend an hour mentally rehearsing a difficult conversation, your nervous system experiences the stress of having that conversation multiple times. No wonder you feel drained after a good overthinking session. But here's where it gets really interesting from a psychological perspective. The emotions that drive overthinking aren't just random feelings. They're specifically related to your deepest human needs. The need for safety, connection, significance, and control. These aren't luxury emotions, they're fundamental requirements for psychological well-being. When one of these core needs feels threatened, your brain activates what researchers call the threat detection system. This system is designed to identify potential dangers and generate responses to protect you. In our ancestors' world, this system helped them survive physical threats. In our modern world, it's trying to protect you from emotional and social threats. The problem is that emotional threats are often ambiguous and ongoing. Unlike a physical predator that you can either escape or fight, emotional threats like rejection, failure, or loss of control can persist indefinitely. Your brain doesn't know when it's safe to stop analysing because it never gets a clear, all clear signal. This is why overthinking often intensifies during periods of transition or uncertainty. Starting a new job, entering a relationship, making a major decision. These situations activate your threat detection system because they represent potential challenges to your core emotional needs. Your brain responds by increasing its analytical activity, trying to predict and prepare for every possible outcome. Understanding this emotional foundation changes everything about how you approach your own overthinking patterns. Instead of fighting your thoughts, you can start to investigate the emotions beneath them. Instead of trying to think your way out of overthinking, you can learn to address the emotional needs that are driving the thoughts in the first place. This is what I call emotional archaeology, the process of digging beneath your surface thoughts to discover the emotional artifacts that are shaping your mental landscape. Every overthinking pattern contains valuable information about what you need to feel safe, valued, and secure. The thoughts themselves are just the tip of the iceberg. Let me give you a practical example of how this works. Imagine you're overthinking a text message that someone hasn't responded to yet. Your conscious mind is generating explanations. Maybe they're busy, maybe they didn't see it, maybe they're upset with you. But if you dig deeper, you might discover that the real emotion driving these thoughts is fear of abandonment. Once you recognize that fear, you can address it directly instead of getting lost in endless speculation about response times and read receipts. You can remind yourself that delayed responses don't equal rejection, or you can reach out to other people who make you feel valued and connected. The overthinking stops because you've addressed the emotional need that was fueling it. This emotional awareness is the key to transforming your relationship with your own mind. Because when you understand that overthinking is your brain's way of trying to meet important emotional needs, you can start to find healthier ways to meet those needs. You can learn to recognize when your thoughts are being driven by emotions rather than logic, and you can develop strategies for addressing those emotions directly. But there's another layer to this psychology that most people never discover: the role of identity in overthinking. Your sense of who you are, your self-concept, your values, your place in the world, profoundly shapes how your mind processes information and generates thoughts. People who identify as perfectionists, for example, will have different overthinking patterns than people who see themselves as people pleasers. Someone who believes they're naturally anxious will approach uncertainty differently than someone who views themselves as resilient. Your identity acts like a lens that colors everything your brain perceives and analyzes. This is why two people can experience the exact same situation and have completely different thinking patterns about it. It's not just about personality differences, it's about fundamental differences in how they see themselves and their place in the world. Your identity determines which situations feel threatening, which emotions feel acceptable, and which thoughts feel important to pursue. The most powerful overthinkers often have what psychologists call complex identities. They see themselves as multifaceted, nuanced, and deeply thoughtful. This complexity is actually a strength, but it can also become a source of overthinking when they feel pressure to reconcile different aspects of themselves, or when they're uncertain about which identity to prioritize in a given situation. Understanding your identity's role in overthinking opens up entirely new possibilities for change. Instead of trying to modify your thoughts directly, you can explore how different aspects of your identity might be contributing to your thinking patterns. You can consciously choose which parts of yourself to emphasize in different contexts, and you can develop a more flexible relationship with your own self-concept. This psychological foundation, the interplay between emotions, needs, and identity, is what we'll be building on as we explore the practical strategies for managing overthinking. Because sustainable change doesn't happen at the level of thoughts alone. It happens when you address the deeper psychological structures that generate those thoughts in the first place. In our next exploration, we're going to dive into the neuroscience of overthinking, examining exactly what's happening in your brain when you get caught in these mental loops. We'll discover why some brains are more prone to overthinking than others, and how understanding your neural wiring can help you work with your natural tendencies instead of against them. We'll also explore the concept of cognitive load, how your brain manages the enormous amount of information it processes every day, and why overthinkers often struggle with mental fatigue and decision-making. You'll learn practical techniques for reducing cognitive load and creating mental space for the kinds of deep thinking that actually serve you. But most importantly, we'll start translating all of this psychological understanding into actionable strategies. Because knowledge without application is just sophisticated overthinking. The goal is to help you develop what I call thinking fluency, the ability to move seamlessly between different modes of thinking depending on what the situation requires. Remember, your capacity for deep analysis isn't a problem to be solved, it's a resource to be optimized. The very mind that keeps you up at night with worry is the same mind that can generate breakthrough insights, creative solutions, and profound understanding. The difference lies in learning to direct that mental energy consciously rather than letting it run on autopilot. Your journey from overthinking to optimal thinking starts with this fundamental shift in perspective. You're not broken. You're not too sensitive. You're not cursed with an overactive mind. You're simply someone with extraordinary mental capabilities who hasn't yet learned to harness them effectively. And that's exactly what we're going to change together. Now, let me tell you about the moment everything clicked for me about overthinking psychology. I was sitting in a coffee shop, watching this woman at the next table who was clearly having some kind of internal crisis. She kept checking her phone, then putting it down, then picking it up again. She'd start to write something, delete it, start again. I watched her go through this cycle for 20 minutes straight, and I realised I was watching a real-time demonstration of what overthinking actually looks like in the wild. But here's what was fascinating. Every time she picked up that phone, I could see her brain working. She wasn't just randomly obsessing. She was running through calculations, weighing options, considering consequences. Her mind was doing exactly what it's designed to do, protect her from potential pain. The problem wasn't that she was thinking too much. The problem was that she was thinking about something that didn't require that level of analysis. This observation led me to one of the most important discoveries in overthinking psychology, the concept of cognitive mismatch. This is when your brain applies high-level analytical processing to situations that don't actually require it. It's like using a supercomputer to calculate how much tip to leave at a restaurant. You've got incredible processing power, but you're using it inefficiently. Most overthinkers experience this mismatch constantly. They bring doctoral-level analysis to everyday interactions, treating casual conversations like diplomatic negotiations and simple decisions like life or death choices. Your brain doesn't distinguish between actual importance and perceived importance. It just responds to whatever feels significant to you in the moment. This is why you might spend 5 minutes deciding what to wear, but 3 hours analysing whether your friend seemed distant during lunch. The outfit decision feels straightforward because it doesn't trigger your emotional threat detection system. But your friend's behaviour activates all kinds of psychological alarms about rejection, social status, and relationship security. Understanding cognitive mismatch is liberating because it reveals that overthinking isn't about having too many thoughts. It's about having the wrong thoughts at the wrong intensity level. You're not broken for thinking deeply. You're just applying deep thinking to situations that would be better served by quick, intuitive decision-making. But here's where it gets really interesting. Recent neuroscience research has revealed that overthinkers actually have structural differences in their brains. Studies using brain imaging technology show that people who tend to overthink have more active prefrontal cortexes, the area responsible for planning, analysing, and complex reasoning. They also show increased connectivity between different brain regions, which means their brains are literally more interconnected. This isn't a defect, it's a feature. Your brain is wired for complexity, nuance, and deep processing. The same neural architecture that creates overthinking also enables extraordinary creativity, problem-solving, and insight. You're essentially walking around with a high-performance thinking machine that most people don't have access to. The challenge is learning to operate this machine effectively. Most overthinkers go through life feeling like they're driving a race car, but only knowing how to use first gear. They experience their mental power as overwhelming and exhausting rather than empowering and useful. Let me introduce you to the concept of thinking gears, different modes of mental processing that serve different purposes. Just like a car has multiple gears for different driving conditions, your brain has multiple thinking modes for different life situations. First gear is what I call flow thinking, the effortless, intuitive processing you use for familiar tasks and simple decisions. This is the mental state you're in when you're having a natural conversation, doing routine work, or engaging in activities you've mastered, your brain operates smoothly without conscious effort. Second gear is focused thinking. The concentrated attention you use for learning new skills, solving specific problems, or completing tasks that require precision. This is the mental state you're in when you're reading a challenging book, working through a math problem, or learning a new piece of music. Third gear is analytical thinking. The deep, systematic processing you use for complex problems, important decisions, and situations that require thorough consideration. This is the mental state you're in when you're planning a major life change, analysing a complicated situation, or working through a challenging creative project. Fourth gear is creative thinking, the expansive, associative processing you use for innovation, artistic expression, and generating new ideas. This is the mental state you're in when you're brainstorming, writing creatively, or having breakthrough insights. Here's the key insight. Overthinkers tend to get stuck in third gear. They apply analytical thinking to everything, regardless of whether the situation actually requires that level of processing. They analyze their breakfast choices, like they're making investment decisions, and dissect casual conversations, like they're negotiating international treaties. This constant use of high-level thinking is exhausting because analytical processing consumes enormous amounts of mental energy. It's like driving a car in first gear on the highway. The engine is working much harder than it needs to, and you're not getting where you want to go efficiently. But when you understand thinking gears, you can start to match your mental processing to the actual requirements of each situation. Simple decisions get flow thinking, complex problems get analytical thinking, creative challenges get creative thinking. You start using the right tool for the job instead of using the same heavy-duty tool for everything. This brings us to one of the most crucial skills for managing overthinking: metacognition, thinking about thinking. This is your ability to observe your own mental processes and make conscious choices about how to direct your attention and analytical energy. Most people go through life on mental autopilot, reacting to their thoughts rather than choosing them. But overthinkers have the potential to develop extraordinary metacognitive awareness because they're already so attuned to their mental processes. The key is learning to observe your thinking patterns without getting caught up in them. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine you're about to send an important email and you find yourself reading it for the 10th time, analysing every word, wondering if the tone is right. Instead of continuing this cycle, you pause and ask yourself, what thinking gear am I in right now? What thinking gear does this situation actually require? You might realise that you're in analytical thinking mode for a task that only requires focused thinking. The email is clear, professional, and accurate. The additional analysis isn't improving it, it's just feeding your anxiety about how it might be received. So you consciously shift to flow thinking, trust your initial judgment, and send the email. This metacognitive awareness transforms your relationship with your own mind. Instead of being at the mercy of your thoughts, you become the director of your mental energy. You start to see thinking as a tool you can choose to use rather than something that happens to you. But developing this awareness requires understanding another crucial aspect of overthinking psychology: the role of uncertainty tolerance. This is your ability to be comfortable with ambiguity, incomplete information, and unpredictable outcomes. Most overthinkers have low uncertainty tolerance. They're uncomfortable with not knowing, not having control, and not being able to predict what will happen next. This discomfort drives them to keep thinking, analysing, and planning in an attempt to create certainty in an inherently uncertain world. But here's the paradox. The more you think about uncertain situations, the more uncertain they often become. When you analyse every possible outcome of a decision, you don't gain clarity. You generate more variables to worry about. When you replay conversations looking for hidden meanings, you don't find truth. You create doubt about things that were probably straightforward. This is why developing uncertainty tolerance is so crucial for overthinkers. It's not about becoming careless or impulsive, it's about learning to be comfortable with reasonable levels of ambiguity and unpredictability. It's about accepting that you can't think your way to complete certainty about most of life's important questions. Learning to tolerate uncertainty is like building a muscle. You start with small, manageable situations and gradually work up to bigger challenges. Maybe you practice sending emails without reading them 5 times. Then you work up to making decisions without researching every possible option. Eventually, you can handle major life choices without needing to analyze every conceivable outcome. This brings us to another fundamental aspect of overthinking psychology: the difference between productive worry and unproductive rumination. Both involve repetitive thinking about problems, but they serve completely different functions and lead to very different outcomes. Productive worry is time-limited, action-oriented, and leads to concrete steps you can take to address potential problems. When you're productively worried about a presentation, you might spend time preparing your material, anticipating questions, and practicing your delivery. The thinking serves a purpose and moves you toward a solution. Unproductive rumination is open-ended, emotion-focused, and keeps you stuck in analysis without leading to action. When you're ruminating about a presentation, you might replay past failures, imagine all the ways things could go wrong, and spiral into self-doubt about your abilities. The thinking amplifies the problem rather than solving it. The key difference is that productive worry asks, "What can I do about this?" while unproductive rumination asks, "What if this goes wrong?" One question empowers you to take action. The other traps you in speculation about things you can't control. Understanding this distinction helps you recognize when your thinking is serving you and when it's working against you. When you catch yourself in rumination mode, you can consciously shift to productive worry by asking yourself, "What specific action can I take right now to address this concern?" This shift from rumination to productive problem solving is one of the most powerful tools in the Overthinker's toolkit. It harnesses your natural analytical abilities while directing them toward outcomes you can actually influence. But there's another layer to this psychology that most people never discover: the social dimension of overthinking. Your thinking patterns don't exist in isolation. They're shaped by your relationships, your social environment, and your cultural context. Many overthinkers are what psychologists call highly sensitive people, individuals who process sensory information more deeply and are more aware of subtleties in their environment. This sensitivity extends to social situations where they pick up on nuances that others might miss. They notice micro-expressions, vocal tones, and subtle changes in behavior that provide rich information about social dynamics. This social sensitivity can be an incredible gift. Highly sensitive overthinkers often make excellent counselors, teachers, and leaders because they can read people and situations with remarkable accuracy. They understand emotional undercurrents, anticipate needs, and respond to subtle cues that others miss entirely. But this same sensitivity can become overwhelming in complex social environments. When you're picking up on dozens of social signals that others don't even notice, your brain has to process an enormous amount of information. This can lead to social overthinking, endless analysis of interactions, relationships, and group dynamics. The key is learning to filter social information effectively. Not every micro-expression needs to be analysed. Not every subtle interaction requires deep consideration. You can acknowledge your sensitivity as a strength while developing boundaries around how much social information you process at any given time. This social awareness also extends to what I call empathic overthinking, the tendency to analyze other people's thoughts, feelings, and motivations with the same intensity you apply to your own. You might find yourself spending hours trying to understand why someone acted a certain way, what they really meant by their words, or how they're feeling about a situation. While empathy is a beautiful quality Empathic overthinking can become exhausting and counterproductive. You can't actually know what other people are thinking, and spending excessive mental energy trying to figure it out takes away from your ability to focus on your own thoughts, feelings, and needs. Learning to balance empathy with healthy boundaries is crucial for social overthinkers. You can care deeply about others while recognizing that you don't need to solve their emotional puzzles or manage their internal experiences. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is give people space to have their own thoughts and feelings without your analysis. This social dimension of overthinking reveals something important. Your thinking patterns are often a reflection of your deepest values and priorities. You overthink because you care. You analyze because you want to understand. You ruminate because you're trying to be responsible, considerate, or prepared. The goal isn't to stop caring or become indifferent to the complexities of life. The goal is to channel that caring into more effective forms of engagement. To use your analytical gifts in ways that actually serve your relationships and goals rather than exhausting your mental resources. This is what I call intentional thinking, the practice of consciously choosing when, how, and what to think about based on your values and objectives. Instead of letting your mind run wild with every possible concern, you become selective about which thoughts deserve your attention and energy. Intentional thinking requires developing what philosophers call practical wisdom, the ability to know when to apply different types of thinking to different situations. It's knowing when to analyze and when to accept, when to plan and when to trust, when to think deeply and when to act quickly. This wisdom doesn't come from rules or formulas. It comes from experience, self-awareness, and the willingness to experiment with different approaches to thinking. It's a skill that develops over time as you learn to recognize the patterns in your own mind and the outcomes they produce. As we move forward in this exploration, we're going to dive deeper into the practical aspects of developing this intentional thinking. We'll explore specific techniques for managing overthinking spirals, strategies for redirecting analytical energy toward productive outcomes, and methods for building the metacognitive awareness that allows you to work with your mind rather than against it. But remember, the foundation of all these techniques is the psychological understanding we've been building. Your overthinking isn't a character flaw. It's a sign of a mind that's capable of extraordinary depth and complexity. The same mental processes that sometimes trap you in endless analysis are the ones that can generate breakthrough insights, creative solutions, and profound understanding. The journey from overthinking to optimal thinking isn't about changing who you are. It's about learning to use who you are more effectively. It's about transforming your greatest mental challenge into your greatest mental strength. And that transformation is not only possible, it's inevitable once you understand the psychology behind how your mind really works.